now. Where is ASEAN today, and where is ASEAN finance today? What is the financial framework in ASEAN? What can we be looking forward to in the next few years? Saif laid out some points, sort of fundamental points, trends, sort of governing the growth of this region, which I'm going to back him up on and say, yeah, this is what's happening, and maybe sort of elaborate a little bit on the background of that. First of all, where is ASEAN today? We take for granted now in this discussion that there is in ASEAN, and certainly when we're in a forum in which there's an EU flag on one side, there isn't actually an ASEAN flag on the other side, right? Where there isn't quite the degree of cohesiveness or integration to ASEAN as there is to EU. We are the secretariat for a new venture that began just last year called the ASEAN Business Club. This is an independent organization. The members are the CEOs of the largest corporations that originate in each of the ASEAN countries. We started up in about October last year. We had a session in which we had a dinner officiated by the Secretary General of ASEAN, Tuan. We had a keynote speaker who was controversial in some parts of Southeast Asia, the Right Honorable Tony Blair. In February, we organized a trip to Myanmar, a business delegation. With the opening of Myanmar, it felt as if Myanmar, having been a part of ASEAN for quite a while, and ASEAN having taken a lot of heat actually for having Myanmar in its ranks, when Myanmar started to open up, we were quite quick to spot this, but a lot of the response was coming out of EU and of course the US. The first to respond in a positive way to the reform process in Myanmar was actually not ASEAN. Again, ASEAN was slow off the blocks, so we organized a trip there. We managed to see the Myanmar government investment officials, and we saw Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. Why am I telling you about this? Because a key task ahead of us is organizing ASEAN's business community. So we started by getting the most senior, the most influential business people together. They happen to just be the easiest to get together. As Syed said, the large corporations already have a reach across the region. They know how to cross borders. They still have issues, but there's the beginning of that. The real action is going to come, and I agree, when we get the real test of an economic community is if the SMEs feel bought in and can trade across the region. Now this brings us to this point, to the role of, the crucial role of banking in this regard. Going back to Myanmar, Myanmar has already even with sanctions, an economy that was growing at about 5% per annum. You can imagine the type of economic dynamism behind this country, as it opens up, and it's doing so at a breakneck pace. I don't think any of us have seen in ASEAN reform on this level that isn't immediately preceded by great violence or an overt revolution. So that means that starting from a position in which there is no banking sector as we would know it. There is almost no modern banking as we would know it. There wasn't checking, there wasn't ATMs. All that is happening very quickly. The banks didn't have SWIFT codes, no credit cards, no consumer economy. I went to banks there, and it was like something out of a Wild West movie. It was all cash. People were just carrying cash in sacks and barrels and all that perfectly safely, right? But it's a cash economy. Now, there will be a tremendous lift to the economy if banking gets in there. And so, of course, ASEAN's banks, alongside the banks from international banks from elsewhere want to be in there and want to play a constructive role. So there's a huge role there in funding, in intermediating business. But not just intermediating sort of business in general, but business in ASEAN. So I go back to this theme, is there an ASEAN today? Is there a kind of operational and meaningful sense in which there is an ASEAN? I think the answer is it's really starting to happen, and this is the year in which you're going to see more and more signs that the international community and ASEAN themselves, ASEAN businesses themselves, recognize that we really do have an economic community. This is not some sort of, ASEAN is actually a security arrangement from 1967 onwards that sort of morphed along the way into something which is now a regional, not a bloc exactly, but a regional association of nations which cooperate. So it's quite a new type of arrangement. The question is, well, is it for real? Is it so on? This is the year in which I think you're going to see a lot, either of recognition and of a change in people's mindsets around this. Why do I say this? Well, going back again to Myanmar, the opening of Myanmar has really huge geopolitical significance. It has actually changed, it alters in a very important way the economic geography of ASEAN. ASEAN, we know as geographically, just in terms of raw geography, it's an archipelago, it's a huge archipelago, right? Indonesia, the Philippines, and parts of Malaysia, Borneo included. And then there's this land with a Mekong side of it. Now the Mekong, in terms of integration of the maritime areas, right, the tasks there are to improve inter-island transport, improve air links, and so on. But in the Mekong region, it's much more a question of land links. And in that regard, the opening of Myanmar brings India and China within 270 kilometers of each other. Now, this is a country which borders five other countries, right? And has as its neighbors India, China, Bangladesh, Thailand. With that opening, and you're already seeing this in terms of China's investment into Myanmar, there really is an enormous geopolitical stake involved in opening Myanmar. There are gas and oil pipelines and roads being built through it to the Indian Ocean. India as well has a very heavy stake in the opening of the Myanmar economy. With all that happening, ASEAN has become a new theater for for rivalry, frankly, between the US and China. And with that increased sort of stakes, you're going to see, of course, investment as well, with a strategic interest. So in November last year, you saw you saw Barack Obama actually in Bali talk about announce a strategic pivot of the US back to Southeast Asia. China actually was already very focused on Southeast Asia. Last month, actually earlier this month, the ASEAN Business Club had the honor of hosting Prime Minister David Cameron. Again, you saw, I think this is the first visit of a UK Prime Minister to Malaysia in about 20 years, in almost 20 years. And that was really to see, it wasn't just Malaysia, it was in Indonesia as well, and in Myanmar. So what was that signaling? It was, again, looking at ASEAN as an economic region, a single trading entity, and an asset class. Now I have more to say, I've run out of time, about initiatives which make ASEAN a safer economic region, because central bankers of Southeast Asia have learned from 1997. They maintain large reserves, prudent macro policies, and there is a swap fund arrangement, the Chiang Mai Initiative. So these things give the region a degree of macro stability and coordination. And important things going forward are the people agreeing on a common banking framework for ASEAN, so that ASEAN's banks can operate across the region, for example, as CIMB does, more as a single banking, sort of a single operation. all that is needed in order to intermediate the trade that is to come. Thank you.
Now, open for questions from the audience. John?
So Pascal Canet from the European Services Forum. First of all, for your information, the EU have already lifted the sanctions for Myanmar, but only for 1 year. So it's a kind of a test period. And they also kept the sanction and the ban on weapons. But I'd like to raise the question, could you tell us more about the common banking framework? Because for the ASEAN, I mean, in the European Union we have, this system of directive, we have the system of having the common capital requirement, the single license for all banking to move ahead. Can you tell us a bit more what's in this common framework in ASEAN? Thank you.
This is something we're very interested in, right? At CARI, and of course the banks in the region are very interested in this, and we advocate something, an official project. It's run by the deputy governors of the various banks, so there's a committee to do this, and they don't talk to us about these things. Right? What we do understand is this. I mean, there are certain elements that we expect are going to be in this common banking framework. These are agreements about capital adequacy ratios and the exchange of information. The one big issue is information hubbing across the region. You can't sort of take Indonesia, for example, does not permit hubbing of information such as that you would need for a kind of a shared resource center, outsource center in, say, Singapore or in Malaysia. There are these strictures, and that's why we need that banking framework. But these probably stumbling block issue, the one that's holding everybody up. I think there are agreement on all these things. The one that's taking a bit longer to think about now or negotiate is what constitutes an ASEAN qualified bank. The central bankers have to agree on what is a qualified bank that you're going to regulate or permit into another ASEAN country and regulate almost like a domestic institution. Right? So again, because of ASEAN's huge diversity, there are very different types of interests involved. You can imagine that Myanmar has different considerations for what they want in, from say, Singapore. So that's where the debate and negotiation and Australia is going to be going on, this notion of an ASEAN qualified bank. The way forward, as with most things ASEAN, since ASEAN is unlike the EU, it's not a supranational organization, it's a cooperative organization. The way forward is some sort of ASEAN minus X solution, which we've done on other things. This is for the countries to agree, those that can move forward first, go forward first. There are multiple tracks, so to speak.
Thank you very much, John. Now, last but not least, Tuan Haji Farisan will speak on. He is an associate director at Performance Management and Delivery Unit, PEMANDU, in the Malaysian Prime Minister's Department. Tuan Haji was among the pioneers in PEMANDU in early 2010, where he was involved in the Malaysian government's transformation program. And Farisan was also a member of the program management team that monitors the implementation of initiatives covering six national key result areas, namely crime, corruption, education, rural basic infrastructure, urban public transport, and low-income housing. His talking points will be on economic transformation program progress so far, and hopefully also some highlights on how that tallies with the ASEAN integration, and financial service as an industry as well as an enabler for ETP.
Ladies and gentlemen, it seems that I'm the only rep from the government, so I will not be making any official statement on behalf of the government, something beyond my pay grade. Anyway, what I intend to do is basically to give three parts of the whole thing.